Who needs to get a job in private equity when you can just start your own private equity firm? What if you could start one with no money, all on your own? In this video, I'm going to talk about how I would start a private equity firm if I came at it with no money and just starting from nothing. But stay to the end because I'll also give you some reasons why maybe you shouldn't start your private equity fund from nothing. All right, first of all, we got to get on the same page for what I'm talking about when I reference private equity. I'm not talking about venture capital or growth equity or those types of things. I'm talking about leverage buyouts, where you're going to go and you want to buy the whole company and likely use debt as part of that acquisition purchase. So how do those deals get structured? Now, typically, you're going to buy these companies with a combination of debt plus equity. So today, I'm going to illustrate the different concepts we're going to talk about with something that some friends of mine did. So they had never run a private equity fund before. They had never worked for a private equity fund. They're really excited about this idea of buying a company and using the same tools and tricks that private equity investors use on the business they were going to acquire. So in this case, it was these four guys that came together that are friends of mine. Well, two of them are friends of mine. One was an accountant, one was a sales guy, one was an operator, and one just had some extra money that he wanted to put into the deal. And they went out and they found this company that was manufacturing bags for the medical industry. Now, what these guys did is they went and got a loan. And in this case, they got an SBA loan because the business wasn't very big. Now, in their case, this was a pretty small business. It was doing I don't know exactly how much, but let's say that it was doing about $5 million in revenue. And after all of the expenses and so forth, was generating about $1 million in cash flow. Now, this cash flow, I say cash flow instead of profits because this was cash that was available to pay down some debt. Now, in this case, the way that you would structure is you'd say, okay, I wonder how much money I could get from a lender like the SBA to help me finance this deal, right? And in their case, I think they were able to get $2 million. And so they took that $2 million, they added in a little bit of their own, not very much, like $100,000. And they ended up buying the company for $2.1 million. Now, as you can see, that's a lot less than the revenue that it was generating, but a pretty decent number on the cash flow. Now, in this particular case, the company wasn't growing very much. It was really small. There weren't a lot of other investors that were interested. It had some nuances. And frankly, they got a screaming deal because to buy a company that's generating $1 million in free cash flow for $2.1 million is a great deal. So anyway, so this is what they did. And in their case, they raised this $100,000 amongst themselves. They all put in some of their savings, but they didn't have to do it this way. What they could have done is they could have used an SPV structure. Now, an SPV stands for single purpose vehicle. And the idea behind a single purpose vehicle, it's not that it's a car or a truck or something like that. Instead, what it means is that it's a legal entity that has one job, one single purpose, or one special purpose. Sometimes they're also called special purpose vehicles. And the vehicle part is that it's a mechanism. This legal entity is a mechanism to collect a bunch of cash to invest in that one deal. Okay, we can get $2 million in debt from the SBA. And, maybe let's say that in this case, the company wasn't willing to sell for 2.1. Maybe the company wanted to sell for $3 million. So they have to come up with this $3 million purchase price. Well, they could get $2 million in debt. $3 million on $1 million of cash flow is great. That means, if nothing else, you're going to pay back your original investment in 3 years. Hey, that's pretty good. So they could have gone out and raised that additional $1 million in equity from investors. And if it were me and I had no money, I didn't even have this $100,000 to start out with, that's probably how I would have approached it. I would have analyzed the business and then I would have gone to investors. I would have set up the single purpose vehicle and I'd say, okay, hey, look, I've got this great business and I can buy it for $3 million, which means that we can pay this thing off, right, just in 3 years because they're generating $1 million in cash flow. But here's where it gets even better is I can borrow $2 million, which means, right, if we think about this, I'm going to put in a third of this in equity, which is $1 million, and I'm going to borrow the other $2 million. And then I'm going to use this $1 million. So every year, I'm going to have my original investment of what I own, and then I'm going to pay off another $1 million, which is going to go towards equity. And then I'll only owe $1 million in debt. And then I'll do it again, and I will own 100% of this business, right? And I only put in $1 million, and if I went and sold it to somebody else, which would in of itself be a killer deal to sell it for just $3 million, well, boom, I would make 3 times my investment of $1 million. So I generate a 3x. But by the way, I think that there are a whole bunch of things that we can do to really help this business grow, right? I think there's some areas where we could cut costs. And, you know, I think if we could grow the top line revenue to the point where maybe it's not generating $1 million in free cash flow, but it's maybe generating $2 million in cash. Well, once a business is generating that much, it opens up this whole other world of investors that are looking for deals that are that big that might be willing to pay even more. So maybe I end up selling this business for like $5 million. I put in $1 million and I end up getting paid out $5 million. That's pretty good. And the way I would structure my single purpose vehicle is if I'm not putting in this money, I'm getting money from investors. Well, then I would look for ways for me to generate some income, both in the meantime, as well as when I exit the business. And the way that gets done in a deal like this, there are 3 basic things that you can do. So the first one is management fees. Now, management fees in this case are what the investors are going to pay you for your time managing their investment in this company. And in some cases, those can range from like 1% to 3%. Sometimes it's also just a fixed fee of saying, hey, look, like I need to make some money here. Like I need to get paid like $100,000 a year, right? So you could do something like that. The other thing is maybe you don't charge your investors. And this is important if this is your first deal. This could be a selling point. You're like, I don't charge management fees, right? I only win when you win. But the company is going to pay me a salary for the help that I'm going to give them, for the board seat that I'm going to take, for all those things. And so you could charge money from the company. So maybe some of this $1 million cash flow gets paid out to you as an advisory fee to the company. And so you would just structure that as part of your deal. The other thing that you could do is your performance fees. So this is your carry. And typical carry is in the 10 to 20% range. Now, this carry is only paid out on the profit. So you win when your investors win, which creates really great alignment, and investors love that. Now, if you're going to be super involved in the company, there might be a stronger argument for why you should make 20%. You can even structure carry so that it increases over time. So you could say, you know what? Okay, I'm not going to get paid 0% carry if all you do is get your money back. Or maybe you get like 1 times your money, your investment, to like 1.1 times your investment. I don't get any carry, right? Or maybe and then you say, you know what, but every dollar above 1.1x your investment, I get 10% carry. You could, and then do 15% carry, 20% carry, right? So in that case, if you're able to generate that 5x that we talked about, maybe you have this structured approach where you're like, I win, you win, when this business does really, really well. So some other things you can do too, right? You fill these in. So maybe it's like 1 to 2 and 2 to 5x. You generate these kinds of carry. So let's put that into math. Your investors put in $1 million. So if they just get their $1 million back, 1 million to 1.1 million, you don't get any carry, right? All right, so if you go through this, like, hey, what's my carry potential on these various deals? Well, in this case, you're going to get $0 because if you just basically return their money or you give them a little bit of a return, like 1.1 times their money, you're not going to make anything. Let's say you generate a 2x return for them. Well, you're going to get 2% of that. So if it's $1 million, that's going to be $100,000 of carry in that case. If you go to 15%, that's going to be somewhere between $100,000 to $750,000. And then if you really knock it out of the park and you generate a 5x return for them, which would be $5 million, that could be $1 million coming back to you on that one deal. So think about that. That's pretty cool. You're going to go in, you've got a business that's generating $1 million in revenue, you got a company that's generating $1 million in cash flows. You bought it for $3 million. You sell it for $5 million, but use this cash flow to pay off the debt, and you only had to invest $1 million. So that means you've got $5 million coming back to you, right? And then this gets split, $4 million for your investors and $1 million for you. And this is just off of one deal, right? You don't have to go out and raise a ton of money, like millions and millions and millions of dollars. In this case, you needed to raise $1 million, which, you know, don't get me wrong, that can be challenging, but if you've got a really great deal and you've done the legwork to find an amazing investment opportunity, then it can totally work. And here's the thing, you do this again and again and again, and you'll build a reputation among investors as somebody, as a great investor in private equity that will allow you to then raise blind pool funds. All right, so if I've convinced you that private equity is something interesting that you might want to do, check out my next video where we're going to talk about what it's like to actually work in private equity on a day-to-day basis.